everyone. My name is Malcolm Graham, Chairman of the Jobs and Economic Development Committee. The day is Monday, October 3rd, 2020, and I'd like to call our initial meeting to order. It's great to see everyone in the room. We have a great turnout of staff members, council members, as well as citizens from the public. And so I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to the Government Center. And I'll turn the meeting over to our director to kind of level set for us in terms of where we're going today. Let's do that. Let's start with council members who are in the room. Then we'll pivot to Councilmember Wallington, who's with us electronically.
Ed Driggs, committee member.
Dimple Ashmura, committee member.
Braxton Winston, serving as Mayor Pro Tem.
Victoria Washington, committee member, District 3.
If we can get the staff members who are present to introduce themselves and any guests that may be with us virtually.
Christina Thigpen, Deputy Director, Economic Development.
Tracy Dodson, Assistant City Manager, Director of Economic Development.
Yolanda Jones, Planning Department.
Priya Surkar, Arts and Culture Officer.
Okay.
We'll introduce other guests, I think, probably.
Yeah, as individuals need to speak, there's an open microphone over there. They can come up there, and we'll make sure that we introduce them for the public record. And now, Ms. Dodson, I'll pivot to you to level set for us as we start our meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember Graham. We have a robust agenda today. We felt like it was a good thing with all the committees that we start with the committee charge and procedures, just to remind everybody since we have some new members to committee. And then we will have a discussion about what I call the first round of the second round of ARPA funding, and give you a little bit of update on where we are, status update of the first ARPA funding that you approved for us earlier this year, and then go into a conversation about arts and culture, as well as an update on corridors of opportunity. So with that, we'll go to the community charge or the committee charge, excuse me. If everybody remembers, this committee reviews and recommends policies to create a thriving economic climate where businesses are connected to highly skilled talent and technologies. As a part of this committee, you also have several assigned boards and commissions to you: the Arts and Culture Advisory Board, the Business Advisory Committee, Charlotte Business Inclusion Advisory Committee, Charlotte International Cabinet, which we'll hit on in just a second, Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority, the Public Arts Commission, and the NASCAR Hall of Fame Advisory Committee. Next slide. Currently in committee, we have two referrals: the International Business Strategy. Some of you may remember that came up earlier this year. It was to review the current work programs and policies related to international business. And what the referral was is really to work with the International Cabinet to identify a scope of services and funding source for a study to develop a strategy and a plan specific to Charlotte's global business interest, and then review and revise any policies that are needed per that recommendation in that work that is to be done. So we've started the process of gathering information to create a plan, holding one-on-one meetings with some of our stakeholders, doing a couple of spot interviews with foreign companies, and we've already started a listening session to open the process more broadly to other interested parties, including like the Business Advisory Committee, as well as the International Cabinet. We began internally staff discussions to make sure that the strategy reflects current priorities and amplifies current goals. So this also overlaps into initiatives that we have, like, for example, Hire Charlotte. So we're doing that cross collaboration right now. And we will be back to you with more on that in coming months. The second referral, which happened today, is the Arts and Culture referral. We'll review and affirm the Arts and Culture Ad Hoc Committee's recommendations, as well as explore how arts and culture policies can be used to drive economic development and job creation in Charlotte. Today's discussion in arts and culture is really just a level set for everybody and for the committee to really get started. After today, then we can discuss how we really jump into the committee referrals and the work of that. So that was a lot really fast. I'll pause to see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Dodson, for that foundational overview. I'd like to welcome to the meeting the district representative from District 5, Ms. Molino. Thank you for joining us. And I open up for any questions from the council members in reference to the opening comments from our director. There being none, the charge of the committee has been duly read into the records. We understand the work before us in terms of the committee referrals, and now it's time to get to work.
Great, thank you.
So let's start with the first agenda item.
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to give you an update on some of the ARPA funding that you had already voted on and give you just where that money is, what is the outcomes that we are seeing, but then also start to talk a little bit about the second round of funding as it relates to jobs and economic development and where we want to go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Thanks, Tracy. So as Tracy mentioned, we're excited to give an update on where we are with the council-approved ARPA investments for Phase 1, $16 million in support of small businesses, workforce development, and hospitality sector, share some recommendations for the first part of Round 2, and then discuss next steps and timing associated with the use of the remaining ARPA funds. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of our Round 1 ARPA funding and where we are in the process. For small business, we are underway with payment for the business partner support grants and working closely with the Beyond Open, that's Wells Fargo's small business fund, in coordination with they just released their grant opportunities, so we're going to be unveiling ours shortly after. I think a lot of applicants will be interested in both parties, and we want people to be aware of both opportunities. This week, we're excited to announce our grant partner for Workforce Partner grant opportunities this week, and then in terms of our implementation from the Corridor Employment Study, some deeper analysis is still underway for that part of the funding. We're working closely with CRVA to deploy that funding. Obviously, Hire Charlotte's well underway, and we're implementing our program recommendations. And then Open for Business, we have some site enhancements, and we're hoping to launch the fully enhanced website before the end of the year. Next slide, please. So here are some first recommendations for Round 2. And you'll notice we have some asterisks next to some items. Those are for our Hire Charlotte related recommendations. And the blue coding is under design phase, and then the several green items are ready for council discussion today. And so we are doing some preliminary work with the target industry hard skills training. We are taking an inventory of all the hard skills programs that exist, seeing what the gaps are, seeing what programs are more successful that lead to jobs at the end of them, and that will inform how we want to invest. We've also had some great conversations surrounding apprenticeship support, so we hope that that component will be reflected in the target industry hard skills training. We'll be talking more about some essential soft skills modular curriculum efforts today, increasing alignment for those top in-demand skills for employers. The Hire Charlotte One-Stop Portal that we've spoken to you about a couple times at committee, we're getting ready to ask for funding for that today as well. Renew, we continue to find success in that program. We're going to be looking at exploring, expanding that into some other industries, so we look forward to coming back to you soon on that. And then Change Please, we'll be introducing to you as well. We're fortunate to have Ryan McMillan here with us today to talk about this. This would be a proposed partnership with Housing and Neighborhood Services, splitting ARPA funding halfway for a total commitment of $950,000. And Change Please is a nonprofit that really works to help end homelessness and provide job training. So Ryan will be talking to you more about that later in the program.
So let's pause here for just 1 second. If you remember, you should be familiar with kind of the color-coded action items. When Sean Heath was doing this before and bringing all of them forward, he kind of broke it down. And so we were trying to do a little bit of the same thing in that we want to start taking this down in smaller tranches. You can see we said for the workforce and economic development component when we did the first tranche that we were really trying to get through the Hire Charlotte work, and that would then help inform the second tranche. And so you might see us here more often talking about these in smaller bites so that we can start to deploy on some of these initiatives that have come out of Hire. So this is the first one. You've got some TBDs that we'll be back here on, and then Christina will go into next. Some other items that we're working on, again, that will round out the full 16 million, but we felt like there's some things that are just ready to go.
Next slide, please. And then here are a couple of future recommendations, as Tracy alluded to round out the 16 million, some additional implementation programs for Hire Charlotte, minority business capacity building, small business ecosystem support, and coming up with some targeted strategies to support businesses and employment growth, specifically in the corridors. So more to come on that, but just wanted to give you a sense of where we're headed in terms of our recommendations. So I'd like to spend a little time rounding out the essential skills modular curriculum. Sure.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you could go to slide number, round one, ARPA approved investments. So just a couple of comments that I have. This Beyond Open, is that in alignment with or in partnership with Wells Fargo that was announced a couple of weeks ago?
Beyond Open is Wells Fargo.
Okay, so are we contributing any funds towards that? No. Okay. And I had mentioned this to Mr. Manager and Holly Eskridge with the Business Partners Support Grant, where many organizations, minority organizations, various minority chambers who had applied for, there were 2 rounds, first and second round, where some of them did not end up getting any funding, where we had seen recurring funding for the same organizations. So I would like us to look at that to ensure that minority chambers are given opportunity in the past that have not received funding, and prioritizing that in the next round, especially for Business Partners Support Grant.
And we're happy to share, too, our scoring process for all of those, how we've done it. We have a separate group that does that with us once the grant applications come in.
Right, yeah, Ms. Eskridge did walk me through the scoring system. However, I think the process needs to be more equitable, and we got to look at it from equity lens to ensure, in addition to the scoring base, we are more intentional about equity so that all minority chambers get a shot at this. I know several minority chambers had reached out and shared with me their experience. They did not get any funding in first or second round, where other chambers have gotten significant amount of funding in both rounds. So we got to look at that from. I know the equity policy is something Mr. Winston, I, and Ms. Johnson is working on, which will be eventually deployed and will be applied in everything we do. But I think we, at least since that is being done, we got to look at equity from equity lens, Business Partners Support Program. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Ashburn, and I think that's a great point, and I kind of second what she said. And the other thing, while we're pausing, we talked about to be determined minority business capacity building, and we're going to study that, I think, in light of the council's recent adoption of the disparity study, and we talked about we have to go out 100 counties to kind of get our numbers, that we should really focus on building capacity locally. So hopefully something will come back that really talks to our efforts to do just that. How do we build capacity here locally for those folks who are charlatans and pay taxes that deserve to do business with their government? Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Floor is yours.
Hey, y'all. I got a real, y'all know I'm excited about Hire Charlotte. Like, I get real, like, on the edge of my seat when we start talking about Hire Charlotte. I think my biggest question is, like, are we preparing to, like, partner with organizations that are prepared to hire the people that we train? Because what I know from personal experience is that training doesn't always equal work. And so I think, you know, if you take the time and you go through someone's training program, you want to make sure that at the end of that training program, there's work on the other end. And so I'm happy to hear you say apprenticeship, but I'm really looking for, maybe some information around specifically where we're going, who are we partnering with, what organizations can we say at the end of, preparing our residents for work, who are the stakeholders who will be prepared to hire our residents. I'm extremely interested in that because, again, it's a little bit of personal experience and personal information to say that, I have a wealth of training, and it means something, like I said, to get trained and then be able to go to work. And I think from my personal perspective, everything starts with how I'm going to earn. I think a lot of what we talk about as a council, everything's kind of interwoven, interconnected. But when you are, an able-bodied citizen and we talk about how you, provide for your family, no matter the circumstance, it starts with, a living wage. And so I'd like to.
Well, and as you know, the Hire Charlotte initiative was really about convening the ecosystem, right? So we are all talking about what everybody in that space was doing. But the first big recommendation that came out of that was the portal, and it's exactly what you're talking about. How are we connecting the job seeker directly to the job?
Yeah.
And we've heard the committee loud and clear this summer say it's one thing to have a digital platform, but we also want to have a physical platform. And so we've integrated that into it, but we're happy to talk to you some more about that.
Okay. Thank you.
I think, Councilmember Drake?
So, I've been pretty vocal. Specifically, the apprenticeship model in the European style, which is kind of a work-study program. Tyler, whatever. I think it's part of a general thrust that we have to make towards encouraging people to participate in programs like that and not have the aspiration to go to a four-year college when that is not going to lead them to anything. I mean, there's an association in the minds of a lot of people with the four-year degree and success, and conversely, and we need to try and kind of establish the respectability and the value of training for skills, for marketable skills. Tyler could make $80,000 a year, and then you've got college graduates who are completely unemployable. So I would like to see us pursue that. I think we actually have a meeting scheduled. I'd like to put resources behind it because we could partner with people who might offer an apprenticeship program in the same model, but maybe don't want to make that investment, the entire investment. And because of the social benefit and how it aligns with our priorities, we might partner with them in creating a program. So I just want to add my vote on that particular one, Hire Charlotte in general and apprenticeships in particular. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Drake. So we will get you on with your presentation.
Oh, no, this is great conversation.
Just a speed bump, just a speed bump. Go ahead.
So if we could advance to the essential skills modular curriculum slide. And obviously, we just talked about the importance of technical and hard skills, but essential and soft skills are really important as well. And that includes things like communication, teamwork, adaptability, problem solving, leadership, work ethic. And so and you'll see here we have several partners. We recognize the City of Charlotte is just one of many organizations that is involved in developing this curriculum. And here are some of our partners on the proposal, Goodwill, Charlotte Works, and Mecklenburg County on developing marketable skills curriculum. This is all about a program that provides universal soft skills, and there is flexibility with a virtual component. And I want to thank Dr. Dana McDonald for being here today, Vice President of Talent Development for Goodwill. So as we go along, if you have questions about this, she's also helpful to answer anything. But the scope really includes research in the beginning. That is such a fundamental piece. Product design and development and implementation. And we really want to focus on making sure that it's sustainable and scalable. In terms of a core curriculum, I'll dive into this a little bit on the next slide. But this is coming from beginner, intermediate, and advanced perspectives. So for essential skills, we're going to use something called PAREN. It's a research-based approach that focuses on essential skills, really to help learners best advocate for themselves, engage effectively with others, and remain competitive in this ever-changing workforce. The employability skills, such as resume work, interviewing, social media. These will be developed based on researching the needs. And then digital skills, everything from intro to computers to business essentials, will be customized based on the feedback that we receive in the research phase. And we recommend conducting an 8-week pilot to test and make adjustments prior to implementation for this work. Next slide, please. So we talked a lot about the portal. Just to kind of remind you of our work so far, we've been working with Radius, the Charlotte Executive Leadership Council, and Bloomberg Philanthropies with a dozen leading employers to identify hiring needs and inform workforce development efforts. And this has really been the work through 2022. Going into 2023, we'll work with employers on aggregating employment opportunities for job seekers. Now, the intent would also be to create physical locations to complement this online portal. So working with targeted brick and mortar locations and developing really a boots on the ground curriculum to make sure that we're servicing people where they are. Next slide, please. So this kind of breaks down the digital and physical components of the development process for the Hire Charlotte portal. Again, we're seeking up to $1 million for this investment. And it's really a phased approach. So it starts with designing and building the version 1.0 of the portal, aggregating those job and training opportunities, engineering data and reporting systems, so making sure we're linked to all the job sites so that we're able to post all these opportunities on the portal, designing content to really help job seekers navigate, identify, and apply for these opportunities, forming partnerships with community partners and employment agencies to activate this pilot group. And then by the end of June, we're proposing we pilot version 1.0 of the portal. Again, we mentioned that one more piece, obviously the physical piece is super important. Meeting job seekers where they are, whether it be at workforce development or housing sites. We also recognize the big lift in terms of marketing and making sure everybody is aware that these resources exist, not only at a physical site that's convenient to them, but also the digital portal. And then here's just an idea that we've talked about in terms of creating some kind of innovation hub where we could maybe find a location in a corridor for face-to-face support. So that's just something that we're talking about at this time. I'm happy to answer any questions before I hand it over to Ryan with Change, please, to share that exciting opportunity.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I just want to highlight again the physical location site. I think that's extremely important. I understand that it's probably not cutting edge that we're accustomed to doing now, but meeting people where they are and having that face-to-face contact with a potential employer, it goes a long way. A lot of what we're hearing again in the communities, they apply for these opportunities and it goes into a big hole and they don't hear anything for months, weeks, years. And so if we can find a way to utilize the corridors of opportunities and identify sites along these corridors where we can kind of outreach, I think that would be really, really beneficial. So hopefully it's not an afterthought,
No,
but
it's congruent.
it's congruent to what we're doing. Questions? Councilmember Joyce?
What he said?
Yep.
And I think having a location could involve more. Like you could get to more like a case management approach. So somebody comes in and you talk to them and you find out what they can and can't do. You find out where the gaps are. You're also in touch with employers. So it's not as passive. You don't just tell them, go on the website and you'll see a lot of applicants mail in applications and they never hear from any and go straight into the bin. And I remember when I worked in the private sector, there's a pretty cruel screening process right off the top. So our job is to meet with people and then communicate with employers, okay, here's somebody that you should look at, right? We've done the first step for you and cuts down on their workload because they trust us not to send people to them that they really would be wasting their time to talk to. So I see more value added in the physical location than just face-to-face. And, you know, I always thought of it as something like an Office of Employment Opportunity or whatever. And given the other locations that we have, I think we would think about where it would be located, or obviously there's a budget associated with that. But the idea is to get more personal and add more value than just being an exchange for information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Kashmir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So under Innovation Hub, I see that there is a potential site in Albemarle Corridor. I remember when a couple of years ago, we had a meeting with several leaders in Albemarle Corridor, and some of the unique challenges that they had raised were around language barrier, specifically, and then transportation. And that needs to be part of our overall strategy, because if people cannot get to work, that's a problem. So I think we just need to figure out how do we work with our CATs to address some of this employment and transportation gaps. And also incorporate in our training right here where you talk about communication, I think could there be a potential opportunity to address some of this language barrier? And I know that was a specific ask from some of the community leaders in Albemarle Corridor. And there were several organizations that were actually providing that training already. Maybe potential partnership could help. I know Jose with Latin American Coalition, the Refugee Support Services, and a few other organizations had raised that. And that was a key challenge, especially for new immigrants and refugees as they settle into a new environment.
So, just really quickly, so I want to remind everybody that so when we talk about our corridors of opportunity, that's how we do it. We think about jobs, we think about mobility, we think about housing, we think about all those layers. Sometimes y'all get pieces, like one specific initiative, like you're seeing here, but we do think about that. It's one thing to try to connect people with jobs, but if you can't get to your job, we haven't done our job. So we do, just so you know, we do think about that. And then we also think about what are the other partners that we have in each one of these corridors. We can't do this work alone. And so hopefully when we get to the corridors aspect of it, you'll start to see a little bit about how we are trying to talk to each other and work with each other and think differently about each corridor and who are the partners that are out there. And just while we're on Albemarle, I'll just add, I mean, we spend a lot of time, for example, in Albemarle on small business. And what we found is we haven't built the trust out there with small businesses to have that real kind of communication. And so we've had to step back and say, okay, because of the language barriers or because a large part of the business owners are in immigrant population, how do we build that trust? And who are the partners that have some trust out there? So it's another example of kind of how we're learning as we go in all the corridors.
Right, and I think that's where I think that's where the partner business support is very important, because some of the minority chambers already have key relationships built, like Latin American Chamber of Commerce, Asian American Chamber of Commerce. I know we have Kimberly here, who also has a lot of connections with African-based organizations where they already have connections built at the grassroots level.
All right. Councilmember Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so that corridor I've lived in for over a decade. I can walk to Albemarle Road from my house. And so I'm thinking about stakeholders along that corridor. And like Councilmember Ajmira said, we do have many, and there's some untapped ones, like you're saying, that because, you know, Albemarle is one, you know, specifically where we are looking at such a wide representation of community members from all over the world, even members of our communities that don't have chambers, you know, and so for those stakeholders, they need something that's a little bit more all-encompassing. And the first one that comes to mind for me is the YMCA of Greater Charlotte. Right now, we got the Simmons YMCA, and they're doing great things. They're doing great things over there already. And I've spoken to their leadership recently. You know, as a new member of council, the first thing I did was think about some of the leadership that we already have along that corridor that are doing great work, that it won't be such a heavy lift to say, this is what we're doing, we're ready to take action, and here's what implementation looks like. And they have the infrastructure existing to take it and, go through the milestones necessary to produce results. So I would encourage us to, as we think that out, to look at those stakeholders like that are already, they have existing programs that we can maybe scale to work on some of the items that we have.
Okay. Part of my job is to keep this train running. So is there any questions? Ms. Wallington, welcome to the meeting. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would ask the general consensus. I agree with what everyone has said in terms of partners and how do we leverage what's already there because it's there. So the sooner that we can deliver something out of the work in the way of getting people connected to jobs, the better. Certainly, we had Charlotte Works speak last time to how their footprint looks in our community, and clearly there are a lot of other partnerships that are easy connections. So look forward to seeing be able to deliver from there. That's all.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Doxson?
Great. You want to introduce Ryan?
Sure. Wendy, can we switch the presentation over to Change Please? It's my pleasure to introduce Ryan McMillan. He's the director of Change Please USA. And this is a really exciting opportunity for economic development and housing to potentially partner and come together to really help make an impact on reducing homelessness and creating jobs. So with that, I will.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for the invitation and the opportunity to come down and talk to you all about our mission. Really appreciate the time. Just wanted to take a brief moment just to give an overview on who Change Please is. So we're a 100% not-for-profit coffee business. So what Change Please does is in countries around the world and in cities around the world, we partner up with various different shelters and homelessness charities, and we take people from those, we get referrals from them, and we train them to be coffee baristas. So you see in this presentation, we've got 3 of our wild trainees who've actually been through our program and have now gone into onward employment to work as coffee baristas. So we source, roast, and supply coffee. We then sell that into various different partners, either through wholesale into places like banks, law firms, stadiums, online sales through Amazon and through our own website as well. And 100% of those profits then go back into our mission so that we can help people experiencing homelessness. We're now in 8 countries, as I said, so we currently, the US is the 8th country that we've launched into. And in each country that we operate in, our model is tweaked slightly differently. So we started in the UK 6 years ago. We started off with one coffee van in the heart of London, strategically placed right near the banking quarter of where London is. And that raised our profile, got a number of CEOs excited about what we were doing and the impact that we were having in the community. And what they did is basically turn around and say that, we have coffee shops inside our buildings. Rather than giving money to corporates and making shareholders richer, we'd like to switch this out so that we can help impact our community. So could we get to the next slide, please? Just kind of some stats about who we are. So, so we're in 8 countries. We launched in 2016. We launched our training academy in London through winning the Chivas Venture Award for the best social enterprise in the world. That was a prize pot that was kind of given to us, and what we did is we used that money in conjunction with some core sponsors, one of which was Barron's Bank, who we now partner up with in Charlotte and supply coffee in their buildings as well. And we built our training academy in our hub. And what we found is that became the heartbeat of the community. That location allows us to have trainees come in, learn their coffee skills, and be SEA trained. And then we also use that as a safe space to offer additional services such as therapy support, access to clean clothing, access to haircuts, banking services for people who had no fixed address banking accounts. And that one individual site literally was the springboard to a number of different initiatives that we ended up running across the world, but particularly in the UK. Our model that we've got has had an 82% success rate. So our trainees will come in, they'll learn their skill set, and then we then work with our corporate partners, so whether it's a Barings, for example, London Underground, or various different other corporations, we then take those trainees, and after their 3 month to 6 month training period with us, we put them into that onward employment. We then keep them with us, or keep in contact with them for up to 6 months once they've left us. And that's just to make sure that if there's any other additional training skills that they need, the client can come back to us. We know that trainee, we know where they're at. If someone, for example, has been suffering from substance abuse, if they fall off the wagon, they can come back into our fold because we offer that full wraparound service. We then bring them back into our mission, help them get back onto their feet so they can stay in that employment long term. Next slide, please. This is what our model looks like with regards to the charity partners that we work with. So, for example, we've already reached out to organizations such as Roof Above, Charlotte Family Housing, Center of Hope for Women, and others. We'll get a referral from one of those training partners. They will come to us. We believe that 44% of people experiencing homelessness can work and want to work, and it's our job to make sure that we remove as many obstacles from their pathway so that they can go out and get that done. We take those referrals, we vet them, so they go into our training program. They either then work in our corporate client sites or in our own sites. So we do operate and run our own coffee shops and coffee vans across the world, and we use those as employment tools to get trainees to go and work in there. So, for example, we have a trainee come in from an organization, they learn their skill sets, they go and work on a coffee van, coffee sales that they then make through that fund the next one and the next one and the next one. And it becomes this whole self-perpetuating model that we have. And the amazing thing that we're finding, particularly with coming in speaking to various different organizations in the US, is that there is a bit of donation fatigue. People are going to organizations and year in, year out, having to donate the same amount of money to keep these operations going. We're self-sufficient. Our organization and our sales fund what we do. Where we do need help, however, is with regards to those initial CapEx investments to get that initial training academy in and up and running so that we can have that impact straight away, so we can start feeding those trainees into the employment market, showing them that proof of concept and generating that revenue, which then funds other projects and initiatives that we have. So as I said, we take the trainees in. The support services are covered on this particular slide by the digital feed, the feed. That therapy support is critical to what we do. If you don't identify that pain point as to why somebody ended up on the streets in the first place, you don't break that cycle. If you take somebody who's been a victim of domestic abuse and you get them employment and you train them and you get them into work and they're earning money, but you don't get them out of that environment, you're not going to help them. If you have somebody who's got gambling addiction, if you get them into housing and employment and they're earning money, but you don't deal with the gambling addiction, again, you're not helping them. So it's our impact team work really closely with our trainees to make sure that they understand those needs, what it is that they have to do. And then the onward job placement is critical. So we partner up very closely with an amazing organization, Compass Group, who are a big employer, not just in North America, but obviously in Charlotte. As a hospitality business, they have a number of vacancies and a number of hospitality jobs that they're looking to fill. So this, unfortunately, on the back of COVID, feeds into exactly what we do. There's so many organizations and hospitals and other coffee shops looking for employment, and we're perfectly set to get these trainees up and running and get them into that onward employment piece. Next slide, please. So this is just to kind of show some of the partners that we work with. We're very conscious, so as I said, we launched in London. I've now been in the city of Charlotte for 9 months, 10 months. Thank you for the warm welcome. Charlotte's an amazing city. I've been very, very impressed. But what we definitely don't want to do is be a British brand that parachuted into a city or into a country and said, hey, we had to solve your homelessness problem. That's not what we're about. What we're looking to do is work with organizations that are already doing phenomenal jobs and see where we can fill in the cracks, where we can adopt our model. We're 100% not-for-profit. Where can the money that we make go towards helping people? And so we've spoken to a number of these organizations, and then we've decided that what we really want to do is focus on that job training and that onward employment piece and partner up with those people to make sure that we can get employment opportunities for the citizens of Charlotte going in there. Just to reiterate, we launched our training academy in the City of London off the back of some funding that we received, and it turned out just to be a huge springboard into multiple, a number of different opportunities that we had. The Training Academy doesn't just provide a safe space for trainees to come in and speak to various different specialists with regards to sort of therapy support and to get their training. Excuse me. What we found it did is when we launched our academy, we actually had Jamie Oliver, the celebrity chef, came down and filmed his TV show when he was there. And when that went out on national TV and they were talking about the initiative and the model and what we did, we saw a spike in our online web sales. That went through the roof. That money that we make comes into our mission. That got various different corporations around the country getting onto the phone to say, look, what else can we do? We've got coffee bars. We'd like to switch the supply out to you guys. And just doing that helps massively. That funds what we do. But we had somebody, we had Colgate, for example, come through and see what we did, and they could see and touch and feel and meet our trainees and see what we did. And Colgate ended up spending millions of pounds actually sponsoring our Driving for Change bus project, which is where we've converted double-decker London buses into mobile crisis centres. So these have got toilets on board, showers on board, washer dryers on board, access to clean clothing, new clothing. There's a therapy room in the top back of the bus where you can live stream through to a mental health specialist or an addiction specialist, or even just a health specialist. We had a lady 3 months ago who she found a lump in her breast. She came onto our bus, spoke to a health specialist, had a consultation via video link, and they told her, you have to go to this hospital. We've made an appointment for you at 9:30 tomorrow. She went to that appointment. It turned out the lump was cancerous, so we literally ended up saving her life. Colgate have sponsored one of our buses. HSBC Bank have sponsored one of our buses. And that's just driven a huge presence in the cities and given us the opportunity to take our services into community areas where homelessness is a big area. And not only do we then offer our services and help them out, it also allows us to identify any potential trainees who can come into our traditional model, teach them to be baristas, and get them into unemployment that way as well. It's a real quick snapshot as to who Change Please is. Sorry, I know it's a lot to throw.
No, thank you. You did a great job. Welcome to Charlotte.
Thank you very much.
And I think you said 10 months.
Yes.
He's still using his GPS, so we understand that. I think Councilmember Ashmir had a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very creative model, especially the first job guaranteed and then onward placement. I mean, that is a serious gap we have in Charlotte. So oftentimes when I hear residents that are living in shelters, there are multiple barriers where they are not able to get through the job training or getting an employment. So do you take, so for an example, alcohol or drug addiction, so how do you address some of these barriers?
So particularly when it comes to alcohol and substance abuse issues, we definitely lean on other organizations that specialize in those. So that's where our partnerships become critical.
But so it's not like you filter those out.
Oh, no,
Okay.
absolutely. And so, one of the main questions we get is if somebody has alcohol abuse issues, for example, we need to be very careful about where we place them.
Right.
So in some of our cafes, we do serve alcohol, in which case that's not a suitable environment for them to be in. But they could, for example, work in a coffee shop in a Wells Fargo or a Bank of America where alcohol isn't served. So that removes that temptation. What we do is we train the trainees not just, obviously, to be baristas and to get them into employment, but we use that as a stepping stone. A lot of these trainees have got other skill sets. We have people who work in our finance department who've come through our model in Paris who said, look, I'm a banker, I can do this. So we're working with people, and everyone's individual. And so that's where our impact team really has to work closely with the individual. What are their requirements? We work with ex-offenders, for example, a number of onward employees. Some of them, unfortunately, cannot work with them, and we get that. So we're not going to we're not going to put any of our trainees in front of those organizations and say, look, we've got a barista for you. What we do for the most part is we want our trainees to get to the point where their background and their history is inconsequential. We want to have a CV that they put into a pile of a whole other CVs, and they treat these individuals exactly as they would everybody else. So it's down to us to train them to get them to that point. If somebody does say, look, actually, I can't hire ex-offenders, that's fine. That means that certain referrals don't get put forward, but there are organizations who definitely do that. We have an amazing individual who's come through our program who did a YouTube video that's been viewed tens of millions of times now, who was an ex-offender, and we actually trained him in the prison system. And when he left and he came out, what was amazing was that we were able to break that cycle of him going back to a neighborhood where he was falling into trouble, because we're like, look, here's some housing, here's some training, this is what we can do. And he stopped hanging out with that crowd, and he's literally just launched his own coffee business about 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's where really the gap is. It's how do we break that cycle of... Also, I know you talked about this is a self-sufficient program after the initial investment. What does the initial investment look like?
So that depends on the location in the city. So we have signed a lease. We're building our training academy in Charlotte, and that initial investment in this instance is $950,000. And that's
Sorry, what is it?
$950,000. So that's the money that we're putting in with regards to fitting out the cafe, getting all the equipment, because of the square footage of the space that we need. So because our US model focuses predominantly, but not exclusively, on supporting vulnerable women, and particularly vulnerable women with children, what we're building in our training academy is a daycare facility. So again, it's removing that obstacle for women to be able to get back into the workplace because childcare is so expensive. So what we had to do is get a space that has sufficient space where we can not only have a coffee bar, sell coffee and be self-sufficient from a financial point of view, but we needed a training location so we could train the baristas so that they knew what they were doing, so they could come and work in our cafe as well as be onward employed. But for the childcare aspect, that for us, particularly in the US, is something that's critical. And so we have to have that childcare facility in place so that a mother can come in, not worry about the financial aspect of it. She can lift herself out of the situation she's in. She can focus on herself and her skill set, and we look after that burden of childcare for her on site while she's there. So that's why we're having to go for a bigger site than we normally would in the city of Charlotte. And that's
Just one follow-up, Mr. Chairman. So this 23, 24 number of people expected to support in Charlotte in 8 years, that's with one $950,000 investment?
yes.
Oh,
That's over the duration of the lease agreement that we have. So the lease agreement that we've signed, so what that is having on average 210 people per year. That does accelerate. That's just through a cafe. When we launched our mobile bus project, we were expecting to get 5 visitors a day. We're now having 22 visitors a day per bus, and there's 3 of them. So those numbers are ramping up, but that's just through the one cafe over the duration of that lease.
Yeah, that's like 408 per head. I mean, that's a no-brainer in terms of cost. But
And that's a shared expense between the city and the county.
Well, no, the 950 was half ED, half housing ARPA money. That was because, again, housing and jobs are going together. So we have been working closely with Housing and Neighborhood Services as we look at this. There's a couple of things I wanted to point out. This was the graphic. So originally, we heard the story through Barings in London and how they put Change Please in the building and kind of what that did for growing the brand awareness. And so as I started looking at this illustration, I got really excited and thinking about, wow, could we put a van in corridors? Can we have all of these different things that we could do throughout the city? And Ryan kept reminding me, we can't do any of the things in the circle without the training facility first. And so that's where we've started to talk about how do we invest to get this started, to then be able to also utilize it in other places as well as grow the brand. We've talked about kiosk in Uptown or on Tryon Street, different options like that to try to, again, provide jobs but grow the brand.
So the kiosks are an excellent example. So Barings helped us convert disused coffee kiosks on the London Underground because obviously rough sleeping on public transport is a really big issue. And so they wanted to find out how can we help resolve that. So we took these disused kiosks, the City of London donated them to us, and Barings helped fund the fit out and the equipment to get those up and running. So then we recruited people from local shelters within those train stations. So Mario, for example, was an incredible guy who was running Russell Street for us, and he came in, and then the coffee that gets sold through that was funding the next one and the next one and the next one, and the whole thing it just snowballs into various different initiatives and fully self-sufficient as well, not relying on additional funding repeatedly.
yes, I think, even with Mr. Graham, even with housing piece, this is really this program would enable individuals to be self-sufficient. So this is not recurring investment. Even if it's like 1,000 per head, even with housing, that is still a lot more effective than us just tackling one issue, which is housing, right? This really touches on everything: workforce, housing, stability, most importantly, because of ongoing childcare support, mental health. So, this is really, to me, this is a no-brainer. So I'm really excited about this. Thank you.
And I think just to touch on the stability piece, when you support a mother who's experiencing homelessness and going through that, stats show that you're actually supporting 4 or 5 people. It's not just that one person. And that's, again, why in the US we focus quite heavily on that.
Okay, I'll keep it moving. Councilmember Driggs.
Yes, so great presentation, and I see the value in it. I am a little curious about just our process. You mentioned, Ms. Dodson, that this came to our attention because of Barron's, but we didn't do an RFP, or they aren't a financial partner.
No.
I'm trying to figure out how this fits in terms of our relationships with others, and whether or not other deserving not-for-profits had the opportunity to position themselves for a grant like this. I mean, again, this is great, but normally we look at it in context. And we also, did we, in our conversations with Change Please, do all the things that we do with our financial partners in terms of the information we require in an application? I mean, I remember going to United Way when I was on the Board of Communities and Schools, and we had to submit a package, a grants package, and we had to submit to a 40-minute interview. Now, we wouldn't do that on council, but I'm just wondering whether that kind of process, which does apply to our financial partners, also operated here. And again, my main concern is the possibility of other deserving grant recipients, and also I have a little bit of a concern about when you've been trained to be a barista and it gets you to a certain level, what's the career path? It's like, I think that we are generally anxious to family-sustaining employment. So this brings them a big step forward. They can demonstrate their ability to work and hold down a job. I've been on the board of Goodwills for 9 years, so I know the steps that we take to stabilize people, get them employed, and give them work. But the thought is, okay, now you're training, or you have a way that you progress from there into, again, the prospect of greater income. So I guess those are my two questions. How did we actually choose this particular grant recipient, and are we comfortable about the opportunity that people have after they learn to be a barista?
Ms. Dodson.
So what I'll just say is we felt like this was an unusual and compelling one that had demonstrated a lot of success. We wanted to bring it forward to you all to see if there was an appetite to continue this discussion. So we haven't done application processes really with concepts like these where, again, going to the summit that's coming up, the housing and jobs combination. And again, we just kind of wanted to gauge the appetite from council in going forward with this.
So when do you expect council vote? Because it says next steps and then including the funding recommendations. Is this one of the associated funding recommendations on which we will which will be included in upcoming business agenda? Is that what?
So it has to come out of committee first.
Right.
And so we wanted to start the conversation here. We had three things, as Christina had pointed out, that we felt like we're ready to move forward if that's the will of the committee and then the will of the full council.
So again, I think you do great work. I'd like to know more is all I'm saying. And I'd like to make sure that we respect the process that other people would expect us in terms of who else there might be.
And just really quickly on the...
Quickly.
Sorry.
Yeah, quickly. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just quickly on the unemployment piece, the coffee barista is very much a stepping stone. So we take those individuals, and the career path through the coffee industry is immense. You know, there's sourcing. We have engineers who've gone on to become coffee machine engineers, graphics designers. You know, and as I said, the partnership with Compass Group is really important because they have facilities management positions. So it's very much just a stepping stone, and then whilst they're there and they're secure, we look at the next opportunities where they can progress to.
Any additional questions from council?
Do you need an action on this today?
That's
Processing the meeting at the will of the council?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to move forward with this proposal.
There's a motion on the floor to move this forward to the city council for consideration. Is there a second? I second it.
Well, I think what we're going to find, though, and I'm speaking out of turn, I'm sorry.
You're recognized. It's been moved properly second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is, you know, Mr. Drake's concern is really going to be one of those things that, although, like, I concur, I think this is awesome. It's touching what we need to touch as far as mobility. And I mean, I don't want to speak for my colleague, but I just want to make sure that, you know, we make sure that we acknowledge that he does have a concern, but, you know.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
But from my perspective, I definitely would say, yeah.
Is this time sensitive? Can we bring this back in November? And that we can ask some internal questions offline in terms of process, or?
So there is, I'm looking at dates for council meetings. There is a little bit of sensitivity to it. So if we brought it back on November 7th, that's a month They have their initial space, but we can work it however the committee would like to work it.
It's the committee's pleasure in terms of, there's a motion on the floor to properly second. Let me say that I'm very concerned. I think you make a valid point. I was just thinking here, there are a number of grassroots organizations in the community that does a lot of good work with the homeless population, and I know the phone and the emails will come. So I think the process question is legitimate. There's no doubt about that. Notwithstanding that, I think this is a very, very, very good project, right? So so I think we got two things that we're dealing with here. One, the process question, as well as the commitment to support an initiative. As Councilmember Ashmore said, I believe it's a no-brainer too. It kind of touches a number of points. So that's why I second it. And so I just will hear Councilmember Wallington. Do you want to weigh in on this? And then I'll recognize Councilmember Drake after you. The floor is yours, Councilmember.
Thank you. It sounds like we have an opportunity to incorporate Mr. Dick's concern without it negatively impacting the timeline. So I'm fine to wait and have it come back so we can just make sure that everybody is feeling comfortable before we move it toward council.
Take action today, or I missed that. I'm sorry.
Sure. I'm okay to hold off for a month to make sure that we get that shored up.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I'm definitely okay.
I'd rather give you a clean bill, as we used to say in the Senate, without any hesitation. I think the support is there. I would never speak for the committee, but this fall up on a concern. And Ms. Dotson.
I just want to point out, and this is one of the struggles that we have, because I do think that Councilmember Drake's questions should be answered. If we brought it back in November, that would be November 7th. The earliest we could get it to council would be, if it came out of committee on the 7th, would be the 14th, and not for a vote until November 28th. So just recognizing that these things take a lot of
Gotcha. Councilmember Drake.
So it is absolutely not my intention to terminate this conversation, all right? And so if the question is, should we continue to talk and try to address the things that I just raised, my answer is yes. As you know, because I've said it before, I don't appreciate the idea that we need to operate under time pressure. So I hope we can have a process that satisfies all of those issues and gets us to a good outcome. I mean, I'm happy to arrive at a good outcome for this, but I am mindful of others who have needs and watch this and think, well, I never even had a chance, you know. So, but as far as I'm concerned, we should keep talking. We should work on this some more, get the kind of information I talked about, and in whatever reasonable time frame, get ourselves confident about how we got here and then vote on it.
I think there's Councilmember Shamira.
Yeah, it looks like there is consensus for supporting this. It's just how do you work the process, right? To ensure that our local organizations are also given an opportunity to submit a bid. So, Ms. Dotson, I know this might be a tall order, but if you could figure out a process question and give us some sort of timeline, while also ensuring that we don't lose on this opportunity.
Yes.
And
She already outlined the timeline,
Yeah.
so we're talking about late November before early November committee meeting, committee gets out of the committee. We talked about before Thanksgiving, right? I mean, so that's the timeline.
would that timeline work with organization?
Yeah, we have the lease signed and the building process starts. We want to make sure that we get a full bill of health. We want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with what's going on. We are working with a potential partner in Denver and Salt Lake City who are also looking at the opportunity and want to hang their hat on being somebody who goes up and pioneers. They've gone through exactly the process which you guys are discussing, which is the due diligence, seeing the return on investment and all that. They actually flew one of their funders out to London to go and see the model and interview people. So we have that data and that information. We think we could turn that around in a very, very quick space of time because we've compiled it all and sent it to everybody. So yeah, there's always time pressures when it comes to building something and getting it completed on time, but, that's part and parcel of building a building.
General support of this
So,
committee until
so what I hear is that we're not going to lose out on this opportunity while we figure out this process. Concern, is that right? Is that what?
And I would say, let me work with the chair and the vice chair to see if there's anything that we can do to expedite that still gets us
Yeah.
through an appropriate process and
Right.
answers the questions. And working also understanding their timelines. So we'll,
I don't have a timeline in mind, so if we can accomplish the things I alluded to in a shorter time frame, that works for me. So why don't we leave the question of the timeline aside and understand that the goal is simply to achieve this transparency and fairness, right, and arrive at the right conclusion.
perfect.
Councilmember Winston, then we'll conclude this conversation. I think we're at a good point,
Yeah.
all right?
So it looks like November 28th timeline could change based on your and Mr. Drake's conversation.
Well, there isn't a November 28th timeline. We're going to simply
Yeah, work
agree
with
to
her.
proceed,
Right.
and we will move ahead as expeditiously as possible
Got
and
it.
just try to meet those requirements.
Perfect, thank
Okay,
you.
all right, so we'll just let that motion die on the floor.
Okay.
All right? All right, Ms. Dodson, and I know we're running way behind.
Great, yes, let's quickly move into the arts and culture update. And I'll pass it over to Priya, but just quickly, just to remind everybody what I had mentioned earlier, which is this is just kind of a level set as we start to think about what the committee referral is. So Priya, with that I will turn it over to you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. We are providing an update on the Charlotte Arts and Culture Plans development. As you are aware, that is a key piece of the work that I work on with our Arts and Culture Advisory Board. And we launched this process a few months ago, working with a consultant team led by Lord Cultural Resources. And in just a moment, I will actually turn it over to Joy Bailey Bryant, who is president of Lord Cultural Resources US, to share the bulk of this update. But just briefly, and you see Joy on the screen. Hi, Joy. We could go, Wendy, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the slides. Okay. It's okay. Thank you. So while we're awaiting the slides, just sharing that this is an update that we were slated to provide to the full council last Monday, but due to some time constraints, we were not able to provide that update last Monday, so we are sharing it today with some updated information based on the community engagement process for the plan that has continued in the last week. So I think, okay. Well, what I think, oh, great, there it is. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Just briefly want to share with you the guiding principles that the Arts and Culture Advisory Board adopted this past January. These are based on the mandate that we have been working with from City Council from last year, and we have shared these with Council before when we presented undergird all of our work, and that includes work on the Arts and Culture Plan. Next slide, please. And so now I will introduce Joy Bailey Bryant. Joy leads Lord Cultural Resources US, and Lord is the lead consultant on a team of consultants that is facilitating the development of the Charlotte Arts and Culture Plan, working with myself and my city colleagues, as well as the Arts and Culture Advisory Board and our community steering group. Joy?
Welcome back, Joy.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And thank you, all of you committee members, for your leadership in seeking a comprehensive plan for arts and culture in your ongoing and active participation in this process. We are in the midst, as you can see from this slide, of a three-phase process, which will end with the launch of that comprehensive arts and cultural plan. You see here that we started our work with an intense opportunities assessment. That's what you see here in phase 1, research and compilation of Charlotte's cultural landscape, trends and benchmarking of other municipalities, market research there in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, understanding of arts and culture's intersection with other city plans, such as the comprehensive plan that you all completed. We moved into the creation of a communication strategy, which led us to that next phase, the public engagement phase, of which we are now in the midst. We are speaking with Charlotte area residents in countywide meetings, sector workshops, with not only creatives from arts and cultural organizations, including legacy organizations, individual artists, startups, for-profit and nonprofit, but we are also understanding opportunities for intersections with different sectors, as well as with the public through cultural participation surveys. So there are a number of different ways that you can see listed here under phase 2 that we are looking to understand the arts and cultural landscape and really get to the point of articulating for phase 3 this broad vision for Charlotte's arts and cultural future. So that's what we're leading up to, where you see in phase 3 that first part. So right now we're in the midst of phase 2, and we are looking forward to getting to that space of the identification of that broad citywide vision for arts and cultural future for Charlotte. And then that will lead us to the articulation of priorities and the creation of task forces that will enumerate strategies and an implementation plan for the arts and culture plan. And that final plan that you see listed here will consist of a draft plan first, and then we'll come back to the public to test that plan through workshops, and a final plan after all of that work has been completed. So yes, so no, you're good. Going on to the next slide. Thank you so much. So where are we intersecting and where are we with updates? The point of this schedule that you see in front of you is to really show the touch points. We are being guided by a number of different agencies and publics, and I really want to point your attention to the pink circles. These are the city council touch points that I want to point out to you. There are 6 of those formal touch points, in addition to the conversations that you all availed yourself of with the individual interviews, and then the focus group conversations, and then presentations like these. You'll see that we have coming up. We have, after this presentation today, where we are sharing kind of an update of where we are and how much and who we have engaged. We have the preview of the state of culture. So coming to you first with that preview of what that all means. So bringing together all of that information from phase 1, the assessment, as well as the public engagement findings together into that state of culture report, or draft state of culture report. And then workshopping that through with the steering group. You see those orange circles, and getting their feedback, which are the green circles, and making that into, or pulling that into a final state of culture report, which is at the end of that month, end of November. We see ourselves moving into strategy development at the end of the year, leading into the beginning of 2023, with ongoing strategy, the delivery of a draft strategic framework in mid-January to February, and then hurtling forward towards that final strategy framework and implementation plan in April of 2023. So there are a number of, oh, yeah, there you go. Thank you. No, you can move me forward. I'm happy to have that happen. So just to give you an idea of how we are engaging so far, as I mentioned, we are in the midpoint of the public engagement efforts, and we will actually be complete with that public engagement work at the end of October. So far, we have engaged almost 2,000 Charlotte area residents, and in those varying ways that I described earlier. We have 715 cultural participation surveys completed in addition to a number of those being in Spanish. And we have reached over 61 zip codes. So I do want to talk for half of a moment about the way that we are gut checking ourselves throughout this process, because we want to make sure that we are engaging the true demographics of the Charlotte area. So we are holding up demographics around age, race, ethnicities. We are really checking ourselves around what areas people live in, hence the zip code. When people register for events, they register on an Eventbrite, and by choice, they have the option of selecting to complete the demographic form so we can capture that data. What you see to the right, on the right side of this slide, the base of the darker green is where we are engaging people through the in-person events. So these are the places where we have we have engaged people through cultural planned convened events. So that's the darker green sections that you see there. The lighter yellow that you see, the dots, are zip codes where we are seeing that we have engaged people through either the survey or through those in-person events. And we also have what we call intercept events, because as you all know, from having had many planning processes, people are not able to assemble at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday just to talk about culture all the time. So we are at festivals throughout the city and throughout the area. We are engaging with people. JCSU's home game, for example, the other weekend, handing out flyers and talking to people around the ways that arts and culture either enrich or they have barriers to arts and culture in their lives. So these circles represent the spaces and places where we are able to engage with people through those types of intercept events, sector workshops, cultural plan convened events, and surveys. That work is ongoing, and we will continue to do this engagement through the end of October. Next slide. So this slide just shows you an image of what people are receiving and how we are starting conversations. On the left, you'll see a flyer that is an image of what people receive. On the other side of that flyer is a QR code that takes you directly to the website and the survey, the Cultural Participation Survey, so that we can gauge how and where people are participating in arts and culture, what are their ideal opportunities, what access they might have and might not have across the area. On the right, the right side, you will see an analog map. We are doing this in our both intercept conversations where we have a booth, as well as at the cultural plan convened events. We have these large boards, and people are covering them with the sticky notes, and they write on there the location where they are experiencing culture, what that culture is. And we started to ask them for those zip codes so that we can find those locations faster and easier, because we are building an asset inventory. One of the things that we are seeing very clearly is that, yes, there are arts and cultural assets that are known. The legacy organizations, for instance, are a very important base for that. But there are also arts and cultural assets that are across the Charlotte area that are not necessarily known, and might be opportunities to address gaps to cultural service delivery in different parts of Charlotte. So we are building that map as we go, and we will have that as a part of the finished product of the cultural plan. This asset map will not only be helpful to us in identifying what assets are available and where gaps are, but we also are overlaying that with different information that we're gaining from city plans. For example, the corridors of opportunity. It's a big part of this work to see what assets either are located in or are not. Are there gaps in those corridors of opportunities? How might this plan lock into some of the work that is happening there, as well as other demographic information or other efforts that are happening citywide, so that this arts and cultural plan definitely intersects and amplifies, leverages as much opportunity as possible to achieve the priorities of other plans, as well as those of this arts and cultural plan. Next slide. This image shows you, this was one of our earliest interactions. Cultural Plan convened events at Avid Exchange where people really actively participated. You see the round tables, very similar to what we do in planning processes. Now, one of the things that we do like to do is we always have some type of cultural display, becomes a cultural experience. We show this image. I'm showing this image particularly to show that you can see the diversity of the audiences and the participation that we are getting throughout these events, because that is one of the hallmarks of the work that we're doing. As I said, we are checking ourselves through the registrations and through everything that we are doing to ensure that we are matching the demographics and exceeding the demographics of Charlotte. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, we are speaking to and engaging a range of publics, including legacy organizations, startup organizations, through individual artists and educators, through these types of community-wide, so county-wide meetings, as well as sector workshops. So when you look at the sector workshops, this is where we're able to get more in-depth into particular areas of the Charlotte community. So yes, artists and creatives are important for us. Legacy organizations are important for us, but also kind of broader areas of Charlotte's community. So the faith community, business and philanthropic sector, we're education community. So the next slide, you'll see more of the sector workshops we have coming up. Getting into neighborhoods and community organizations, and really just getting into those spaces and places where we know people have needs that arts and culture and creatives can address, and asking them, what are some of those opportunities that you see out there? What are some of the barriers and challenges? How might we, and what is your vision for the cultural future of Charlotte? So what are we hearing? This is my last slide, and I can give you a big broad before I turn it over to back over to Priya. We're hearing a number of things, and this is both from the artists and creatives perspective, but actually as you look at some of these findings, you'll see it's from the general public as well. So generally, we're understanding that there's a diverse community of artists and arts organizations, and that there's tremendous possibility that results from this diverse community of artists, the opportunity to cross-pollinate and assist with some broader cultural ills through arts and creativity. People see that, and they've articulated to us many different ways and means. As I'm sure you all have heard, and I've heard in many of these meetings, that space is a key need. Affordable workspace, affordable living space is a key need. And that there are many spaces that could be utilized and revitalized and preserved by local artists as to address some of these needs. And there's just a real need to address space and that affordability, desirable space need there. Finally, I will bring up this need of a central information hub, because we continuously hear this, that people are always looking for that kind of one-stop shop, that communication opportunity for where residents, either new to the city or born and raised, are looking for that quote unquote full list of events of what is happening in Charlotte. And what that says to us is that they're really looking for that kind of one-stop shop of where to go to understand what's happening arts and creativity wise in Charlotte. So I will pause there. And actually I'll send it back over to Priya and before we go into Q&A.
Thanks, Joy. And we just have one more slide to let you know what's coming up. So as you can see, we're going to continue the various streams of work that Joy referenced. So certainly continuing the community engagement through the various formats. The consultant team is continuing to research comparable cities, doing a funding assessment of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg arts and culture funding landscape and various governance models and potential funding sources looking at what other communities do and lessons learned and food for thought for us. We have our next advisory board and steering group meeting on October 25th. And we will continue with these monthly meetings and with regular updates to council. And I'll just make one note on that. The timeline with the various different colored circles that's showing the council touch points, one of those was actually for October. Should have been pink for today. So noting that additional touch point. So with that, I'll pause, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to provide an update.
Thanks, Priya and Joy, for the presentation, and I open the floor up for questions from council members. Councilmember Driggs.
So really appreciate this work. I think it illustrates the range of things we need to think about as we go to create a culture plan. I'm thinking back to the ad hoc committee and our conversations. I think 3 of us are here. It seemed to me then that there was a diversity of opinion among council members on some issues as to where we go, like live music venues, housing for artists and things.
Not all council.
What's that?
I said not all council, diversity of opinion.
No, of course not. No, this was a rare exception.
Yes.
But the only thing I want to be sure of is as that work continues, that we are not on track for a disconnect when we get the plan back and then somebody says, hey, I wanted this or I wanted that. So I think it would be great if council, for the benefit of the people working on this plan, could maybe issue a clear statement as to what our kind of goals are as funders of this thing, understanding that it's not good to come back later and say, hey, wait a minute, that's not what I meant. And there is a lot of room in what we've seen for different interpretations or different outcomes. So I think this is really on us, Priya, but I would like us to think now about what the things are that we want to see in return for our funding, and also to talk to the private funders about it. Because our goal is to remove ourselves as far as possible from the arts conversation and not have elected officials awarding grants and things, but at the same time, we're accountable for the money that we're investing. So not sure exactly how we do that. I've talked to the manager and to the private funders, but I just don't want us to arrive at the other end and have somebody go, well, whoa, that's not what I expected.
I think that's a good point, and I'm hoping that the Mayor Pro Tem will help us with that in terms of making sure that when we land this plane, we land it in a way that people respect, understand the outcomes. There's a lot of work that's been going on right now, and so if there's any unreadiness among members, I think now is the time to kind of raise your hand and tell us what they are. I think the community engagement process is more than adequate. They've already spoken with the council members. There's always the policy, and there's, surprise, surprise, a little bit of politics. So I just want to make sure that we all are aligned in terms of the goals, the objectives, where we're headed, the methodology that we're utilizing. And so that when we get to a point where I think it's time to say we've got something that we can look up and say this is what we collectively have done, I think that's where I would like to get to. And as you begin to talk to a number of council members, hopefully you can help us and the committee kind of get to that landing spot.
Yes, and I think, we need to figure out how to have a full council conversation around this. I'm going to speak, for instance, for myself right here. I think one of the guiding principles that is very important to me is the innovative and implementable approaches, right? That's what I think from this cultural arts plan. For us as the city council and as future city councils, what is implementable? What is within our purview, right, to deal with? Like it'd be, yes, for access in arts and culture, for instance, it might be a great thing if all K through 12 students had access to arts teachers or music teachers, but that's not something that we as a city council can implement because we don't govern art and music teachers. So is this going to produce kind of policy recommendations that city council can follow coming out of this cultural plan? I think one of the reasons why this is living in economic development is because to that end, we don't want to be engaged with individual kind of deciding who should get what monies, but what sectors can we grow, right? What sectors can we grow so that we have more revenue being generated by those sectors and therefore can be put back into the arts and culture infrastructure, again, within the purview of council. I shared with council in the packet last week sort of an executive summary of this larger study that was done by Charlotte is Creative along with Ernst & Young and UNC Charlotte. So what are some of the, again, business realities of the creative community, and how do we start to kind of partner with the folks that need that type of, again, economic development partnership, but applying the things that we do from our lens through this. So that's what I would like, the cultural arts plan to be able to produce as a tool for current and future councils. I don't know how to necessarily understand whether that's the approach that we're taking, or if that's in line with everybody else's right now. But
Priya, you want to chime in?
Sure, and thank you all. One thing that we did get into just through, I don't know if Joy is still on, yes, Joy is still on, but just wanted to note is that we have used the ad hoc committee's priorities that were documented last year, and I know we touched a little bit on this in our July presentation and in the small group meetings that we did, the focus groups with council members that we did in July, where we actually, and I know this because I myself copied and pasted the language from the ad hoc committee's letter into the request for proposals that was approved by the Arts and Culture Advisory Board, and that World Cultural Resources responded to and based their scope of work on that request for proposals. We always do want to touch back in and make sure we're still aligning with those, and we do actually, the Lord team and we, the city staff, often talk about that. We actually have provided the Lord team, and they have taken into their research the Charlotte is Creative Commission study. In fact, our Lord team was in town when the study results were released and when I sat on a panel discussion along with another advisory board member, Carla Aaron Lopez, to discuss those study results about the needs and opportunities that the creative community has talked about. So we are feeding into this process studies like the one that you've referenced, Mayor Pro Tem, and in fact, the LORD team used that study and some other recent studies to base the cultural participation survey that we're doing. And in fact, some of the questions, if any of you have taken the survey, please, as residents of the Charlotte area, you can also take the survey. You'll see that there are questions we're specifically asking that reference some of the findings so that we can dig deeper and take into account some of the recent work that's been done and try to help us glean information along those lines.
Councilmember Driggs.
So I'm not questioning anything you're doing. For our benefit, I'm just saying we now have 4 new members who weren't around. And I think we ought to just think about, we've got grassroots, we've got the economic development aspect of it, the large venues, and I think we need to do a little more work to give direction as a body. And in my mind, we should reach a point where we take a vote, and with that, we do not then come back later and say, wait a minute, that's not what we wanted. I mean, I think the clearer that we can make our expectations at this stage, the more closely the final product will align with what we collectively want. And that could involve a majority vote in which 1 or 2 people are simply told, that priority of yours doesn't align with where most of us are. So we're not going to look at that any further. But I've had this concern since last year, frankly, where I thought, a whole bunch of questions we haven't answered yet. And we have a responsibility to get the answers to those and communicate clearly while the culture plan is being generated, and also to communicate with our private partners, because they had certain reasons for involving themselves, and they had certain things that they had in mind. How's the grant process work, and so on. So we want to be sure that we are in agreement with them, and again, that there are no surprises later. That's my only point. I mean, I don't see anything that you're doing that in my mind already, looks like a problem for us. But I just see the potential for a later date where somebody says, hey, wait a minute, I wanted this, or what about that? And we should kind of deal with that and eliminate it now. Thanks.
Ms. Wallington, I don't see a question, but I just want to make sure that we hadn't forgot about you if you're out there. She dropped off? Okay. Councilman Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So from just committee members' discussion, I hear there is consensus in what is being presented and what are the next steps. So do we need to take an action on this item that we as a committee agree? I know there were some concerns about this in the past. So for all of us to be on the same page, I just want to make sure that committee approves these recommendations if there are no other concerns.
I don't have a problem with that. I think we're moving in the right direction. A lot of good work is being done, obviously, from my perspective as well. We've got to dot some I's and cross some T's. But in terms of the direction that we're going, getting the community input, understanding the charge that was given to the steering committee and PREA early this year, I think we're doing exactly what it is that the council has directed them to do. Again, the devil's always in the details, right? And so I think the work is good work. I just want to make sure that at the end of the day that we over-communicate, we over-involve, that makes any sense, Joy, in terms of making sure that we reach each and every citizen of this community and get their input in terms of how we can make this art community better today than it is tomorrow, than it is today, and that we kind of do that we endorse the work that's already been done, and it's done in a way that we have directed staff and others to do. Mayor Pro Tem.
I guess, the question I would have, again, this is me personally, what is this plan, what's the audience, right? We passed the Comp 2040 plan, for instance, and that was a land use policy guiding document. So my question would be, who is this kind of cultural arts plan for? Is it for future city councils, or is this community-wide? Like, how are we going to use the kind of end product? That's not totally clear to me about what this end product is supposed to kind of guide.
Priya?
Sure. So my understanding is that this, as a comprehensive arts and culture plan, which is what my understanding is of the charge that we received from Ad Hoc Committee last year, is that with a comprehensive arts and culture plan, that's typically a document that can be used by anyone in community in that it reflects many different pieces that are needed to appropriately support, resource, cultivate arts and culture in a community. But that depending on the particular community, it is adopted as policy, or it may lead to a specific policy document that stems from it. So I think that last piece is maybe a question that is yet to be answered, is at the end of this process, when we have the completed plan, would that be itself a document that City Council would consider as a policy document? Not that, and we always make this clear in every public meeting, any individual interview that we're doing, whether it's with council members or with private funders, which we are doing as well, that it's not a document where there's one entity responsible for implementing and achieving everything. It is something that requires a lot of different stakeholders to happen. But what can happen, again, it varies depending on the city, is it may be then that the city would take the pieces of it that fit with city functions and say, okay, these are the things we're going to take on, and we'll work those into policy. Sometimes, I know, for example, Dallas is a place that this happened. There was the plan that was agreed and kind of approved, but then there was a separate policy document that stemmed from the plan, and that piece became part of the City of Dallas entity's policy document.
So this is on our agenda today for an update. So I'm not sure, Councilmember Ashmere, that we need to take any formal action other than I think there's consensus that we're moving in the right direction. Part of what I'll take on as a personal responsibility, and I want to draft Mayor Pro Tem Winston and its vice chairman, is that we had a council member that was kind of leading this a little bit for us, and she's no longer here. So I'm going to be actively a lot more involved in kind of steering this, but I want to do with your support and participation, so we can make sure that we kind of steer to stay in the right way with the consensus. So when we get to the council, that we've already answered all the hurdles, similar with the last stuff, right? We've answered all these questions before it even gets there, right? And I think that might be the appropriate approach. So I think we just received the information today as information, encourage the staff to continue to do more work. And then I'll get with the Mayor Pro Tem and the Vice Chairman offline to kind of see how we can work as a little unit, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
And I think, just to add to that, that it will be on the agenda for the full council next week for an update. Is that correct?
Yeah. And
Sorry,
That it'll be on council, for the full council, since we did not get to it last week.
So the next time we would have, so between now and next week, we will not have much more to update on besides continued updated community engagement numbers. So the next point at which we had proposed doing a meaningful, update with content is on the November 14th meeting, which has, that would be the draft State of Culture key findings to share with the full council.
I think that works good, because it give us some time to kind of do some due diligence ourselves, and for me to kind of get with you and others, as well as there's a whole lot of, again, dotting I's, crossing T's, just to make sure that we're on a good place when this thing lands. Okay?
You keep doing what you're doing. I mean, full speed ahead. I think we have some work to do.
And it's council work, it's not your work.
Okay.
Just trust me.
Understood.
All right, it's been a long meeting, Ms. Clark, and you've been patiently waiting. I'm not sure we're going to get to it or not. You tell me, Tracy.
Given the fact that you have 15 minutes until the next committee meeting starts.
So I owe you lunch.
Y'all need to owe me whatever money I didn't raise these last couple hours. How about that?
But you learn about the arts and ARCO.
Here to
And,
support my colleagues.
yes.
Laura has been fantastic to stick with us today. We definitely do, at the next meeting, want to bring back some of the committee updates or the corridors updates, because we have made a lot of progress, not just in launching the next corridor, which is North Tryon and Graham, but also some of the internal organizational work we've done and external organizational work that we've done to make corridors bigger and better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, I don't. I know it took a while today, but this is where the work should be done in committee, so that when we on Monday night, it really should be execution.
Yeah.
And so we apologize, but I thought it was a good meeting, and there's some follow-up items I'll do. But thanks everybody for their participation. If there's not anything else,
That's it.
everybody's good.
Move to adjourn.
Meeting adjourned.
Okay, good.
You cut me off. Who cut me off?